Russia warned on Tuesday that it would respond accordingly after Ukraine fired long-range US missiles into Russian territory for the first time.
And this as President Vladimir Putin issued a nuclear threat on the 1000th day of the war by lowering the threshold for using such weapons.
Now, a Telegram channel affiliated with the Ukrainian military has posted the video, which it says shows US supplied Army tactical missile systems or ATACMS missiles being fired from an undisclosed location in Ukraine.
Moscow says 6 US-made ATACMS tactical missiles were fired at a military facility in Bryansk border region. This area is close to Kursk, where Ukrainian forces have captured Russian territory and heavy fighting is underway.
The missile system is known as Army Tactical Missile System, as I mentioned earlier as well, shortly known as ATACMS. Interestingly, they were initially developed during the Cold War to destroy Soviet targets. Kiev has been using them in this war already, but only on targets in occupied areas of Ukraine. They were not permitted to use these missile systems and target inside Russia. As Putin has made it clear, that is a red line for them. The missiles can strike targets up to 300 kilometers. That's the range.
Ukraine had for months been demanding that Washington let it use the long-range ATACMS missiles to hit sites on Russian territory.
Moscow has repeatedly warned that the use of Western weapons to attack Russia's internationally recognized territory would make the US a direct participant in the conflict, pledging an appropriate and palpable response.
The
fact that ATACMS was used repeatedly in the Bryansk region tonight, of course it is a signal that they want to escalate the conflict, and it is impossible to use these high-tech missiles without the Americans. Putin has said this many times.
Together we have accomplished much, but we must not fear doing even more. Now, Putin has brought 11,000 North Korean troops to Ukraine's borders. This contingent may grow to 100,000. While some European leaders think about, some elections or something like this at Ukraine's expense, Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own. The more time he has, the worse the conditions become.
Now for more on this, we're being joined live by Dov Zakim from Washington, D.C. He is currently Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies and the former Under-Secretary of Defense in George W. Bush administration. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you for having me.
Sir, Russia has called it a new phase of Western war. How do you assess the broader impact of this?
Well, look, every time we have sent anything to the Ukrainians, the Russians have gotten all flustered, and Mr. Putin and his spokesman have talked about nuclear weapons. And in fact, just the other day, Mr. Putin signed off on a supposed change in nuclear strategy, which, according to the change, means that a major attack on Russia could lead to all sorts of nuclear consequences. Of course, it's Mr. Putin and his people who define what is a major attack, and whether or not they made a change, it really doesn't matter. The threats have been there all along. Now, the giving Ukraine at long last the ATACMS, and they fired 6 of them. They apparently took out a weapons depot at a city that's only about 250 miles from Moscow, clearly does give Ukraine a new capability. But for the Russians to talk about attacking sovereign territory when they've been doing it since February of 2022 is a bit much. One thing I would add, because we are now letting the Ukrainians use longer ATACMS for longer range strikes, and by the way, there are estimates that the missile can actually go as much as 600 kilometers. That actually was done by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, with which I'm affiliated. It also means that the British missile and the French missile both of which, the French one is called Scout, and those could not have been used before because they had American components. Now, of course, they can and will be used as well, so that will boost the Ukrainians too.
Mr. Zakim, you mentioned that Russia has always reacted in this manner. They've always gotten flustered. They've never held back from mentioning nuclear war. But at this point, where we stand currently, Putin had very clearly made it clear that the current situation now that we are seeing with ATACMS hitting targets inside Russia, that was a red line for Russia. The nuclear doctrine has already been altered, and we saw Russia carrying out nuclear drills in the past as well. Some latest reports are also suggesting that Russia started building nuclear-resistant bomb shelters. Is a nuclear war now imminent in Europe?
I don't think so. Remember, Putin had said that Crimea was part of sovereign Russia. So when the Ukrainians were attacking Crimea, they were already attacking sovereign Russia, according to Putin. And of course, he did not respond. I think we have to recognize that the Russians obviously understand that this is going to give Ukraine a much stronger negotiating position. We know that Mr. Trump wants to negotiate an agreement between the two countries. But obviously, the stronger Ukraine is in that position, the more likely it is to at least get something to justify its resistance for so long and push Putin back. If Ukraine is weak and negotiates from weakness, Putin gets everything he's taken so far, and probably his appetite will not be satisfied, and he'll go for more.
So now speaking of Trump, of course, Ukraine had been asking for these strike capabilities for a long time. The Biden administration had remained reluctant. Now when it is time for Trump to come back to the White House, and we know that he said it repeatedly that he will end the war in 24 hours, get both sides on the negotiating table and end this war. That being said, this is a pivotal move by the outgoing administration. So how do you assess that?
Especially when it's coming at the last leg of his term, when Trump has already made some talks with Putin. At this point, is it a welcome for Trump?
I think so, actually. And the reason I say that is that, look, Trump knows that the Ukrainians will resist unless they feel that they have something that they can negotiate with at their end. Strengthening Ukraine, actually, in my view, makes a negotiation much more credible and might make it easier, actually, for Mr. Trump to get some kind of deal. Look, in my years in government, I negotiated more than half a dozen agreements. If you think that you can get an agreement with someone who absolutely feels they're cornered, that's not the way it works. If they feel that they're cornered, they will push back and fight to the end. On the other hand, if they feel that they've made some progress, that Putin has to negotiate fairly and not from a total position of strength, I think Mr. Trump has a good chance of getting, I don't know if he can do it in 24 hours, but I think he has a good chance of getting that war to end. And of course, he would very much like to get a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Mr. Zakim, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights. A lot of, pertinent points that you have made there. And of course, this is a situation which is developing by the hour. There'll be lots more to discuss. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much.